Welcome to Madison Buy Sell Trade. Today, we're going to go on an awesome new adventure through the wonderful establishments of Madison, Indiana. So follow me today as I'm going to entice you and excite you on the wonderful places of Madison, Indiana. So follow me, sir.
Let's move that camera. We get the camera set just like this and we can see all the shots.
Exactly.
It's a fantastic day to be visiting Madison, Indiana.
Like every day.
The term Madison, Indiana, of course, derives from the Old English Madonna,
Okay.
which meant brick.
That's a fascinating fact, and that's correct.
And here in Madison, Indiana, we boast the most brick per square capita of any place in the United States.
That is interesting. I didn't
That's
know
why
about
Madison is called Brick Land.
that. Brickland with the direct translation is.
A lot of people are not aware of the fact that Madison, Indiana is actually the first place to actually incorporate roads in their city.
There's a place coming up on our right, correct?
That is the virtual store. We want everyone to be aware of Madison Insurance Agency number 215 here on Madison's great Main Street. First insurance company of Madison. It was formed in 1832 by Abigail Spencer III. She later killed her husband in a jealous rage.
It's a sad, sad story, indeed. The kids have recovered, but they'll never be the same again.
It'll never be the same again. Coming up, we also have a fantastic place. Everyone in Madison is aware if you're a Madison local. Main Street
Madisonites.
Nails. That's right, a Madisonite. Main Street Nails was the very first human nail shop in Madison, Indiana. They sold human nails in the 1880s. Actually, people would grind them and turn them into a type of tea. They thought it would help their rheumatoid arthritis. But here at Madison Nails in circa 2020, why, they just do the nails for you. Isn't that great?
That is fantastic. Have you actually tried the tea before?
I have. Let's just say you'll need a bathroom somewhere nearby. Come up to one of the first paved streets in the United States. We're coming up on Jefferson Street. A little bit of history for everyone out there.
Can we do a quick shot? Just looking at Main Street, looking over, looking at all the lovely different places, little mom and pop shops, the brick and mortar stores, and just the wonderful Madisonites enjoying their coffee, their teas, and their wonderful breakfasts.
The great thing about Madison, if you're watching this virtual tour presented by Madison Buy Sell Trade, is that many of these shops have been here for 100 to 130 years. That's right. We're coming up to Eliza Doolittle. She sells candies. It's a fantastic shop here in Madison. Eliza Doolittle, she formed the shop in 1883 here in Madison off the hip that candies was going to be the next gold investment.
Really?
She started this shop right here in Madison, 1883. Of course, it's now run by her great nieces. But it's a fantastic shop. If you're trying to get yourself some gold-plated candy, the only place in the United States. Walking up to City Hall. This is the first incorporated building in Indiana. The first City Hall in the United States was, of course, in St. Augustine, Florida. The second in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And the third, that's right here in Madison, Indiana.
Did you know
First City Hall. Let's go ahead and cross
And
the
you know
street.
why it was the first city hall?
As you can see, the streets are made of a type of asphalt mixed with shale because we, of course, are next to the river. And many shells were pulled from the river in the 1870s and were mixed with mortar to create our roads. One of the best places here in downtown Madison, Cultivate Nature Shop. It's a shop to cultivate nature. They actually produce their own nature right here in their shop. Everything that you see is in fact nature. Village Light Bookstore, incorporated in 1895, one of the oldest bookstores in Indiana. It's not the oldest, but it's the second oldest. They are known for their great full-size light at the top of the building that stands as a beacon for all the ships that go down the Ohio River. Village Life Bookstore in the 1890s, owned now by the third, I believe it was the third owner. It's not in the same family, but it has transferred over families. But this family has had it for, I believe, 60 years.
Awesome. That's
Great
fantastic.
piece of Madison history.
There you go. The beacon of downtown Madison.
Now I know this one coming up for you is a favorite.
It is one, I was actually just about to say that verbatim. It is one of my favorite places.
As we have toured around Madison, Indiana over the past several weeks as we prepared for this virtual tour, I know that my host here was quite impressed with this shop.
Gifts at Last. It's the only place you can get some of the essential stones that was mined in the southern downtown Madison area, and also in northern Indiana as well. They have a lot of different types of stones like stalagmites and diamonds. There's the one place that they actually made the first ever crystal cut diamond. So it's one of them really cool stores that sells just antiquities of fine jewelry and stones and stuff like that, and that will last.
They are gifts that will last. I believe that Ebediah, was it Ebediah?
Ebediah Springfield.
Ebediah Springfield, who came over from Ohio, started this business in the early 20th century. Oh, here we have one of the great pigs of Madison. As you can see, the Madison pigs, if you see them as you walk around, is it's just a quick note, a subtle gesture for the history of Madison. Everyone, if you were aware of Madison's history, the very first butcher shop in Indiana was right here in Madison, Indiana. And as you see these large ceramic pigs, sometimes they are made out of concrete. This is a note to the past that we were the first to slaughter pigs.
Another thing about Madison is that it's one of the most musically gifted towns in Indiana. We were nationally recognized for some of our music events and our music concerts. There's a lot of different musical things here. Like we just passed an awesome shop called Crawdaddy Music. They were the first, not Cobble, what is the word that made a Lutheran? Lutheran?
They were the first Lutherans who made guitars.
Yes, sir.
Crossing another one of Madison's famed streets.
Mulberry. It's an awesome shops where we used to be on Mulberry. A lot of shops migrate from Mulberry to Main Street when they make the big jump.
Now, if you notice the change in scenery around us, we have a new location that was just put in recently. Ingles Drugstore. This store was just introduced recently in the last 5 years. This Ingles Drugstore is a piece of new Madison history. That's right. If you prefer to be able to get your drugs, your liquor, or perhaps even that rare and elusive snack, it's Ingles Drugstore.
Moving forward.
In Madison, we continue to create history. Now this one, I knew that when we were doing this video shoot, that you would be quite interested in this store. Am I right?
Oh, you are in fact correct.
The Yellow Dollhouse.
The Yellow Dollhouse. Well, the owner was named Annabelle. She had a bunch of collective dolls because she was one of the best, what was it? What's the word I'm looking for? She was the president of the Doll Foundation in Madison, Indiana, one of the first doll foundations in the history of the United States. Not the first one in the world, one of the first one in the United States in southern Indiana. She had over 15,000 rare and elusive dolls, anywhere from Susan B. Anthony dolls to Raggedy Ann's to everything in between.
1823.
Yes.
One of the oldest buildings here in Madison, Indiana. The Dollhouse, as it's colloquially known, stands apart from the rest of the buildings in its bright yellow nature, fervent design from the updates in the 20th century and the 19th century later on. If you look at the planks of wood standing right in front of the window, you will notice that they are all intricately carved. This carving was done by John Hawkins III from actually Ohio, Dayton, Ohio. He came over during the gold rush of Indiana. He tried to make his fame and fortune on gold, but of course there was not much gold to be had. Therefore, he ended up back at what his initial trade was: carving, scoring, laying wood flooring. The flooring is unique, and the only place you can find this type of flooring is here in Madison and in Dayton, Ohio. Remember, he was also the one who shot and killed his wife over a squabble about how many eggs he was going to be able to eat, and of course, whether or not they were going to be hard-boiled or soft-boiled. There was some contention over whether or not he should be eating hard-boiled or soft-boiled. Tensions rose, a knife was introduced, and a murder occurred. The sad part of history, but we are left with the nuances of historical fact and truth that you can perhaps be a murderer, but also use that knife to carve intricate wood ornamentation. A moment of silence for that great knife, those unborn chicken eggs, and of course, the lost life of the man who could no longer continue to produce wonderful pieces of art.
Moving on.
Moving on with our virtual tour of Madison, Indiana.
The Happy Moose.
Yes, I remember that story. Let's let all the people listening to our wonderful virtual tour
of Madison, Indiana,
hear about the Happy Moose.
And this is a newer story. I mean, it's still been around. It was the 1930s and 40s. They actually import exotic and rare meats to Madison, Indiana. So that's a lot of the restaurants get all the nice cured meats from other places. This one was being from Canada, of course, getting the moose, the big moose. And now, because it's been such an incorporated part of Madison, Indiana for the Madisonites, then now we have our own type of moose. We call it the Mad Moose.
The Mad Moose.
The Mad
Funny
Moose.
bit of history. My sister was bitten by a moose.
Interesting tidbit. I'm glad she's okay. She survived, correct?
One of the great pieces of Madison lore lies right here at the door of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. This store was, in fact, the very first store to open its doors in Madison. It was founded by the owner, John Williamson. John Williamson moved from Ohio to start a new life. He found success in owning the store. He owned the store for an amazing 83 years. Stayed in his family after that. It did switch hands briefly. It has now came back to his family. For the last 33 years, it has been owned by a Williamson Family Trust. They all do not live in Madison, Indiana, but instead are in several places throughout the United States. The one living in Seattle, the other in Georgia, and I believe one still resides in Newark, New Jersey. The trust is meant to be able to contain and keep control of the building, keep the architecture sound, the building in wonderful shape that you see today. You note the carved delaquoise here at the top of the building. These were French inspired, brought over by the Huguenots. You notice the artwork inside is original. The artwork was done by John Williams III, the third son in line to the trust. If you look further to your right, you'll notice the large aqueducts that run off the building into the street. These were produced by the Romans. Yes, that's right. These were brought over from Rome and incorporated into the building. The water that is saved is put right back into the beers that they produce, the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. And remember, every drink you take is a little bit of history. Moving on. You'll notice that the walls of glass in Madison are quite thick glass. This is because this was formed from crystalline. It's a type of substance that glass usually is not made from, but at the same point, if produced properly, makes it practically bulletproof. Coming to the last store
On this side of the street.
is Little People's Boutique. Of course, this was created by John Webster. He had a show back in the 1970s, Webster. John Webster was a man of small means and small build. He noticed that as he tried to search for clothing for a man of his stature,
He came up a little short.
yes, that's what he said in his biography. Of course, the name of the biography, Coming Up a Little Short, resonated with many people in that age range that perhaps were not quite the height of their others. But John Webster was a man of simple and small means, but he decided to bring the need for small people's, little people's clothing to Madison, Indiana. He opened the store in 1984. It was ran by his sister, surprisingly a 6'7" woman named Elisha Webster. They still own the business. It was in great repair. And remember, for every little person behind them stands an equally large person. We're going to be crossing the street here, continuing on with our part 2 of
You guessed it.
Madison's virtual tour. As we cross the street, a little bit of history about Madison. The very first sawmill in Kentucky moved right across the river into Indiana in 1772. It was typically producing wood planks to be put onto ferries. These ferries would take these wood planks down the Ohio River to places far and wide, into places such as Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and Toledo, Ohio. As we come up to the first stop on our virtual tour, we will see Montgomery, Elsa, and Harriet.
LLP.
And I believe you have had some history with them.
Yes, through my first divorce, I actually contacted them. They've been established for quite a long time. In the 1920s, this is the third or fourth generation of the Montgomery Eisner. And how do you say that last name? Because I always
Hardy.
Hardy. Attorneys at law. They've been studying law for a long time. They're actually Harvard graduates that transferred over here to Madison and established a small attorney, a small firm, kind of taking care of like divorce issues, taking care of child protective services and stuff of that nature, kind of family means of Madison, Indiana.
I do remember that the Pardiak family, though, they got their start in music. I believe 2 of the family members went to Juilliard and were practically trained there as Juilliard trained accordionists. Madison history is full of rich and cultured people. Some of them more cultured than others. I cannot play an accordion, but here at the Montgomery Elsa Pardiak ask for a little ditty, and they might just pull out an accordion. Moving on with the tour, we're coming up to the second oldest building in Madison, Indiana. It's called Old Red. Old Red was the Hammond family restaurant circa 1822 to 1947. But unfortunately, because of apartheid, they closed. That's right. During the 40s, they decided that they would integrate. And as such, the place was ransacked, burned, and left in shambles. The Hammonds themselves decided to rebuild. This is the second building on this location. Remember that in history, not all history is good. But here at the Old Red building, the Hammonds family restaurant, although it's no longer in service, it still stands as a reminder that we must show tolerance and love, no matter if you were once a frog. Moving on, Muddy Folk Antiques and Collectibles. This is the oldest antique shop in Madison, Indiana. It has been here since 1892. They have produced some of the most ubiquitous antiques of Madison in its history. The Bourbon and Bird Dogs, a gentleman's boutique. This dates back to Britain. Do you remember the story?
About the British Bourbon and Bird Dogs. It was, what did you say, what year it was?
I didn't. I believe you visited the original store
Yes.
in Bourbonshire.
Yeah, in Bourbonshire, England. Yes, that is correct. 1890s when it was first established. They specialized in a certain type of bourbon, and they, of course, they got their name from all the dogs that would curate around the building in the streets of Birmingham. And a lot of the hair kind of integrated into the vats of the bourbon and
Yes.
give it that sweet, tangy taste.
That is correct. And that's why here in Madison, we have an old saying, if it's bourbon, it better have some hair. That's right. We're standing here at One City Center in front of Bourbon and Bird Dogs, a gentleman's boutique. Started in Bourbonshire, ended in Madison, Indiana. You'll notice the wrought iron furnishings of Madison, Indiana were produced in Savannah, Georgia, was sent upriver. The Savannanites would produce the wrought iron, send it up to New Jersey. It was put on rails and taken across over to Indiana. Here we have the oldest barber shop in southern Indiana. There's one older one here, there's one older in Gary, Indiana, but this is the oldest in southern Indiana. The barber shop only treats women. So if you are a female, this is the shop for you. If you're a man, unfortunately, we'll say good day to you and send you out the door. Here in Madison, Indiana, we have many unique locations. This is one of my personal favorites, the Old Empty. The Old Empty was a shop that was first formed in 1922. I believe your father, Deshaun, your father helped start this business. Is that true?
That is very correct. Ronald B. Wells established this building, and he actually got to bring it from the ground up. And not
He wasn't the owner, but he did help with the proprietor.
Yes,
Is that
he did.
correct?
He was the foreman.
The foreman of the Empty shop. And what was his service here?
His service here, he was actually the rottener, which is a word when you bring up the wrought iron and put inside the building to curate to keep it firm.
Very good.
So he brought up the foundation, kept the foundation. He also helped with the flooring and the ceiling. But he was most of the structure, and he was the foundation of this little establishment, the Empty. And on this site, in 1940, nothing happened.
I remember that. It's a little bit of history. If you notice as you walk down the street, you will see many representations that you will find throughout history of Madison. Some plaques, some stars in the Walk of Fame. John Wayne was born here. Many of these things are indicative of the type of people that have frequented or lived in Madison, Indiana. Continuing on our virtual tour of Madison, Indiana. Coming up to Bourbon Street. This street was the first Bourbon Street in the United States.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the Huguenots who moved from Madison moved to a little town in Louisiana called, yep, you guessed it, La Fort. And there at La Fort, he created the second Bourbon Street. From that Bourbon Street, he then moved to another little town in Louisiana. And you could probably guess that. That's right, Baton Rouge. From Baton Rouge, he died. But his son, yes, his son, took that name, Bourbon Street, and went all the way to another little town, this time in Texas, San Antonio. From Texas, he decided that perhaps the name Bourbon should have something to do with the drink bourbon. Therefore, he brought it to Kentucky. And from Kentucky, it came back to Indiana, to Madison, and that's why we still have the title Bourbon Street, History Capital of the World. Moving on, we see one of the oldest establishments for photo in the United States. Nice shots. This was the very, very first photo shop that was west of the Appalachian Mountains. What happened was the owner, Jonah Jameson, left his home in New York City, in the Bronx. He wanted to do photography of farms. He checked along the Ohio River, the Old Muddy, the Mississippi, and yet he decided to come back to the Ohio River Basin here in Madison, Indiana, to start his business, the very first photography shop west of the Appalachian Mountains. And that building still stands today, as you can see. Wonderful piece of history. The Civil War photographer that you've seen so many photos of. He got his start right here
And nice shots.
at Nice Shots,
131.5 Main Street.
Madison, Indiana. Moving along our virtual tour, we're coming to the oldest dance hall in Madison, Indiana. Deshaun, I believe that you have had many experiences here at this dance hall. Is that correct?
That is correct. I actually went to dance school here many years ago at the Red Bike, ballroom and tap, and a little bit of jazz for about 4 or 5 years. Wonderful, wonderful building. All hardwood floors, so you can actually hear the tap from your shoe. Still really busy. They have a lot of dance competitions here as well. The national championship actually gets held here every year for dancing.
National Championship of Tap, held in Madison, Indiana, every third Thursday of August.
That's correct.
Remember, if you're in Madison, Indiana, check and see what type of events are coming up. Perhaps you can stay a few days later and catch one of our historical, world-known, world-famous events. Continuing on our virtual tour of Madison, Indiana. Many of these shops, of course, are made with bricks that we talked about earlier. Bricktown, United States of America. One of the artists here, West Street Art Center, was known for using bricks in his art. We're going to go down this abandoned alleyway. In this alleyway, you will notice a few things. Fred, the local drunk. Hello, Fred. Hello, Fred. Oh, he seems to be passed out. Fred, there you go.
You got any change?
Thank you, Fred. Thank you.
No, hey, you just don't walk away from me? Bless you.
Very good. Here in Madison, Indiana, you might be confronted by our local bums, but don't be afraid. We have made sure we keep their nails clipped. And this is what we brought you to. The amazing secret entrance of Gallery 115. During Prohibition era, Gallery 115 was a Prohibition hotspot, a speakeasy, a whistle pig, a pig whistle. All you'd have to do is knock 3 times and say the magic words, which would change from week to week. This would keep out the local law enforcement, as they were always a week behind. The famous phrases that were passed around were things as such as, "I am here to rob you," or "Give me a whiskey sour." These type of phrases were meant to gain entry into Gallery 115, a piece of Prohibition history to delight everyone in Madison, Indiana. Moving on out of this shambles, we're going to go past one of our local bums. Again, he seems to be completely passed out by now, and yep, he definitely is. Moving along, you notice all the brickwork. Again, Bricktown, USA, the home of bricks. Brick them. Back out onto the main street of Madison, Indiana. We come to the front entrance of Gallery 115. No longer a speakeasy. Well, now you can bring your kids. Here we have a new location, Flee from Maine. It's a new location that's telling people how to avoid tornadoes in the United States. We have one of the oldest smoke shops in Indiana, located here in Madison, Indiana.
Right beside the theater and the cabaret.
Famous theater and cabaret of Madison, Indiana. Much history was incorporated into this theater. Very first vaudeville shows were produced in a small tent that resided on this location in the early 1800s. 1822 was the very first handbill that we have found to indicate that there were shows happening on this location. Throughout history, we have had many major actors come and premiere their films here.
Plenty of film festivals as well, at Cannes and everything else.
For instance, one of the large ones, of course, John Wayne, born right here in Madison, Indiana, premiered his film Hatari right here in this theater to a mass of 500 people, mostly local Madisonites. and the movie was not well received. Moving on from the historic Madison Theater, we come to East Main 103. Local art dealers selling Fabergé egg knockoffs. Shooters, this was the inspiration for the show Cheers. Very first inspiration for a show right here in Madison, Indiana. Shooters was opened in 1871. Basically, the initial patrons were all bricklayers, brick makers.
Of course, Brickland, Bricktown.
They would come and wet their whistle after a hard day's brick-making work. For the first 40 to 50 years of its establishment, it was not known as Shooters. It was known as the Brickers. The Brickers, as they were colloquially called, would come here every day at 4:30 and wet their beaks on local brew. At the time, whiskey was hard to get, but they perhaps created something of their own. That's right, using beer and the small amount of whiskey that they had, they made what was called Boilermakers. These Boilermakers were actually originally called Brickmakers. Throughout history, the Boilermakers took on the drink, and history is now as we know it. In 1922, Shooters changed its name to Shooters from the Brickers. And since then, it has stayed Shooters. In 1978, a producer from Hollywood, California, came to Madison, Indiana on vacation, seen the little shop of Shooters, and decided that he would build a whole story, a whole show around it. Of course, the show premiered in 1982, featuring the work of Ted Danson and later of Woody Harrelson, who actually lived right here in Madison, Indiana, and went to Hanover University. They chose him because of his knowledge of the actual location of Shooters. Established Shooters, 1922. Moving on with our virtual tour of Madison.
Crossing to the main drag now again.
Notice that the lines in the road are painted with a very fervent white. That white is called Caucasian white, only found in Madison, Indiana. Moving on to 102 West Main Street, here is the Fabled Red Roadster Cafeteria and Coffee Shop. You have a story about this location, do you not?
I did. This was one of the first places I ever worked at. One of the first places that took care of me when I was a young whippersnapper. They've been here for quite a long time. 1964, I believe they were established, and they were just an eatery, and then they probably morphed into coffee. They actually have their own ground special coffee beans that they ferment, and a couple different things. I believe it is in Bird Dog Bourbon, but I'm not entirely sure. It's been a family secret for years.
You know, actually, I read a story about this location. I've been in the back of the building, and I've noticed they have a small tuft of grass that's fenced off. I then noticed one day there were 3 goats on the tuft of grass. I surmised that perhaps the tastiness of their coffee lies in the goats. I believe they're feeding goats the coffee beans and are collecting what comes out of the goats. Very famous type of bean making, first incorporated in France in the 12th century. The stomach acids and lactates break down the bean, soften it, and then as it's made into coffee, it releases natural flavors and therefore a better cup of joe. Remember, Madison, Indiana, first and foremost, historical in all ways. Moving along.
Coming to our right is a historic Madison building as well. Dorothy Eagles Rheindaler Preservation Area. It is the longest continuous historic district's main office of the Madison Downtown Indiana area. A couple little things about her. Dorothy was a philanthropist.
Philanthropist.
Yes, she did philanthropy. Her family is originally one of the founders of Madison, actually. Her great-great-great-great-grandfather was the first mayor of Madison, Indiana. So she has the lineage of all the historicness of Madison, Indiana. So she takes care of the historic downtown area. So she keeps make sure all the buildings are in check, everything's up to code, and all validations are indeed correct. So she has a couple on different boards as well, helping out with a lot of other historic districts around the country, but Madison being her main base.
And of course, the long and short of the historic Madison is to protect the integrity of the buildings and to cause no trouble for any of the occupants inside
said buildings.
Moving on, we have the wonderful Cocoa Safari chocolates.
Imported
Chocolate.
from Cocoa Safari.
Chocolate first introduced to Madison in the early 17th century, back during trading routes. At that point in time, fur traders would trade their furs for chocolate from the indigenous to the indigenous peoples, who then would trade it back to them for double the cost. The fur traders quickly went out of business, but then realized that perhaps they could stake a claim to the idea of becoming chocolate vendors. Madison, Indiana, first introduced, 17th century. Cocoa Safari, established 1872. Moving on, we come to one of the largest stores in Madison, Indiana.
And one of the most popular, I might
The
add.
great copyists themselves would say many a thing, many a wonder about this store. But alas, if they did, they'd just be copied. Moving on, we find some of the most wonderful aspects of Madison, the Wrought Ironworks, we have the wonderful buildings made of wrought iron. Here is one of them. A shady spot for you to rest your loins during a hard day's drive. You can notice the echo when I enter. Music is put on here every third Tuesday at 12 o'clock at night. The natural radiation that comes from your voice radiates out into the world and gives Madison a little bit of music.
I don't know if you heard that or not, but a fine young man stopped me first time coming to Madison and asked me where the best place to get a cup of joe was. And of course, I referred them back to the place that we just worked on.
And don't forget about the local zoo.
Exactly.
We're not going to be going there today, but please, we recommend that you look up Madison, Indiana's local zoo.
Big cat rescue.
Big cats. They feature big cats. It's not the only thing they deal in. They also have small cats. We're coming near the end of our virtual tour. We would like to thank all of you for stopping in. The Madisonites being present as we walk around and you see their smiling faces, all of them taking part in this journey that we call a virtual tour.
We want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for liking, listening, and watching this virtual tour in its full duration.
Madison, Indiana, we want to tell you all to go ahead, plan your next trip, and we will be happy to see you there. As we finish up our concluding last leg, we would like to remind you that the Scott Block, circa 1884, is the best location and safest location in all of Madison
And thank you.
Oh wait, that's probably better.
Did we get it?
It's
Did you?
fantastic. Everyone, For the virtual tour, we want to thank you and appreciate you walking with us
And watch.
along the Madison historical way of downtown Madison, Indiana, and virtual tour land of Madison, circa 1700 to 2020, Madison, Indiana, circa this time as we watch the videos and play them and watch the videos. Thank you all, and goodbye.